welcome back to Business 163, Personal Finance. And as we continue in the module number 2, this whole discussion on behavioral finance, I thought this would be a good occasion to talk about something that's really important when we talk about habits and habitual behavior. As you can tell from this title slide, it's the topic of cognitive bias. Cognitive bias is deeply related to the whole topic of habits, and cognitive bias is something that's quite the rage, quite the popular topic to talk about these days. And so I thought we might spend just a little bit of time talking about how cognitive bias, well, what is it? And more importantly, how does it affect our economic and financial decision making? So let's take a look. What is cognitive bias? Well, here's a quick working definition. Cognitive bias is a systemic pattern of deviation from rationality in judgment. So not all of our thinking in our judgment is completely rational, objective. Here's some deviations from those kinds of things. We look at them, we call them cognitive bias, a biased way of thinking. And quite frankly, when I use the term bias, right, we think of things like prejudice and those kinds of things, and those, if we apply them to our judgments of other people, they can many times be very harmful and damaging things. And we talk about this as you see the second bullet point, right? That we end up creating our own script, right? Our own subjective reality from our perception of the input. This construction of reality that we make up in our minds then be not the objective input may end up dictating my behavior, right? This construction I've built in my head, this story I've built. And quite frankly, you see the third bullet point, cognitive bias is a natural human way that we form narrative or the big picture in our minds. And we do this to simplify the world around us, right? And so we make whole judgments about whole entire people groups, right? Not necessarily because we're evil people, because at some base level it makes it easier for us to think about big topics, right? All those Japanese people are like this. Well, you and I both know that not to be true, right? And yet we do it because it makes it easier to think in mental shorthand about an entire complex population of people, right? All Japanese people eat rice. Well, to some degree that's true, but we also know that's not entirely 100% true in every single case, right? All people from that neighborhood don't have a good education. Well, every time we use those kinds of terms, right, we are building a subjective reality about things that may not be necessarily true, right? Now, how is cognitive bias related to the whole idea of habit? Cognitive bias comes about because it is our human brain's way of trying to offload complex decision making into autopilot in order to ease the pain, the overload, the burden on our cognitive function. In other words, cognitive bias is like habit because it's also a human attempt to reserve some cognitive brain power for other stuff. So I hope that makes sense, right? It is a way our human brain tries to deal with complex reality by offloading activity into preconceived notions. It's building a story, a big picture in our minds that may not always be 100% true. How does this affect our lives? Well, it affect our lives in a whole lot of different ways, right? But with regards to financial decisions, some examples of cognitive bias might be, well, we buy a car from a salesperson that we tend to like. We end up equating, well, I like this person, with what? Being able to trust them, right? That's sort of the illustration here of this car salesman we have here in the image, right? This is what we sometimes call halo effect, right? And so we tend to superimpose or believe good qualities about a person that we initially tend to like, even perhaps against the evidence or in the lack of evidence that is this person really someone we can trust, or do they have another agenda like making a sales commission, right? Or what are some other examples of cognitive bias? We are drawn to evidence that confirms a long-held belief, and we tend to ignore evidence which might seem to conflict with our pre-existing beliefs. We call this confirmation bias, right? We prefer, third bullet point, to buy the same products from the same sources, even in the face of evidence of perhaps there are better new options that we just are uncomfortable considering. Why? Because we like sticking with what we know. This is what we call status quo bias. Or here's one, I think this hits all of us. We think that there is good value when we think there is a deep discount from the sticker price, even if, quite frankly, the sticker price was never actually its selling price. This is what we call anchoring effect. And we see this all the time, right? When we go shopping online, we see what the retail price, the MSRP, is supposed to be, and then we see that crossed out, and we see today's price, which maybe is every day's price, right? But it's served up to us as the discount price, and so we think it's a good value. This is an example of cognitive bias. Now, let me show you an example of cognitive bias that hurts us in online shopping. And this is two existing products that are currently on sale on Amazon.com. You can see there are both phone cases, clear cases for the iPhone 12. One of them sells for $18.98, the other sells for $16.98. But the most important thing I want to show you as I zoom in on these one at a time, let's look at the one option here for $16.98. Notice this one has about cumulative ratings of about 4.5 stars, but it has 2,350 ratings. All right? Over 2,300 ratings. And the second one has only 6 ratings, despite the fact it's 5-star rated. Now this one sells for slightly more, but quite frankly, paying $19 for a phone case versus paying $17 for a phone case, I'm going to argue that the price difference is somewhat negligible. But the big difference here that's going to sway our opinion, or so the research suggests, is the fact that this one has over 2,300 ratings, this one has only 6. Despite the fact that the one with 6 ratings has a flawless 5-star rating, and the one with the far more ratings, right, has a slightly lower rating, the research suggests what? When we are served up with information on customer ratings and the number of customer ratings, right, that the detailed ratings describe previous buyers' experience, while as the number of customer ratings suggest how popular a product is, what does it really demonstrate? The research demonstrates there is no connection between highly rated products and popular products, but the research also shows that we as buyers are heavily biased towards popular products, not higher rated products. What do I mean? In plain English, we tend to buy products, we want to buy products that are popular, not the ones that are highly rated. This is not a rational bias. However, it does show that we tend to think that if a product is popular, we trust it more. We tend to go with the herd rather than with actual product ratings. In fact, the research suggests we tend not to read the ratings. We'll read possibly 1 or 2, but then we give up, and then we go and with the most popular product. This is just an example of how an existing cognitive bias that operates in most of us tends to make us less than optimal at online shopping. And quite frankly, as we'll look at in the next video, online sellers know this, and so they serve up prominently not only the overall customer ratings, but the number of customer ratings for us to be suggested with. Right? Now, this next slide shows you this enormous map, this codex of every cognitive bias that we as human beings tend to fall victim to. You can't read this on the slide. Quite frankly, I can't either. Ha! And that's why I've given you this image as a downloadable PDF in Canvas. And so if you want to do more research and more understanding of your own cognitive biases, here's all the big ones laid out in this massive cognitive bias codex for your later study. All right. Now, what can we make of this? What we can make of this, the beginning of making wiser choices, is knowing that as human beings, we all have our own set of cognitive bias. We all have them, just part of being human. It's part of what makes the human brain able to handle all the aspects of this complex life we have before us. So it starts with taking the time to ask yourself, why do I have this preference for this choice? Why am I drawn to this option? What is the narrative? What is the story I'm telling myself when it comes to making this decision? Understand, when it comes to cognitive bias, we've all got them. I have them. I have the same sets of cognitive biases that are born out in my own personal ways, right? About life, about buying, about money, about people that we all have, right? And the first step, the beginning to making wiser choices, is examining my own biases, understanding where they come from, being able to name them, and then taking control of them. Thanks so much for your attention. We will see you in the next and last lecture video, lecture number 5 in this module on behavioral finance.